Hi, welcome to History 1302, U.S. History since 1877. Now, this is going to be an orientation video to prepare yourself to guide you to complete successfully the second exam. That is going to be due on June 21st. So, it's going to be an exam that is going to be very similar in many ways, almost identical, not necessarily 100% identical, but very similar to the first exam. And I'm here to explain to you um, eh, how you're going to actually prepare for it. And you're going to see a lot of similarities again that, well, the format, for example, and the way to actually go about watching the recorded video lectures and answering the questions and so on is very similar again to the way we carried out the first exam. So now let me display the exam here. So so I can go over it again and guide you, step by step. So once again, this is going to be yet another take-home assignment, okay? Just like the first one. So it's not going to be timed, to be taking place on June 21st, a specific time and so on. Again, this is something that you're going to be working, hopefully, day by day as you're watching the lectures, taking notes, and you can just go ahead and be answering the questions as you go along, okay? So there's going to be three topics that are going to be presented for for this second part. Again, so we're moving into part two of the course, which is called The Crisis of Modernity. There's going to be the fourth topic titled Popular Reform Movements from 1880 to 1920. There's the fifth topic called World War One from 1914 to 1918. And there's going to be yet a sixth topic on the Great Depression from 1929 to 1930. Now, there's going to be a part one and a part two uh, of this exam, very similar to the first exam. Now, for part one, I'm not going to require you to view all of the videos of the fourth and fifth topics. Okay. Uh, so, what I'm actually going to do here is actually allow you to choose one or the other. So, we can just scroll, for example, to the instructions here of part one, the topic section. I'm actually asking you to choose one topic, just choose one topic and answer all of the questions on that topic very fully for 70 points. So you choose either topic number four, popular reform movements. So you watch entirely the three sessions I presented on topic number four and answer all of the questions. Okay. Uh, there were about five questions that I framed here for this topic. You answer each of those questions as fully as possible. Or if you don't want to do this topic, that's fine. You just watch the video sessions I posted for the fifth topic on World War One. Okay, so it's one or the other. You choose. Okay, I'm letting you choose which topic to actually review. And so if you choose topic number five, you watch the three sessions I posted there very thoroughly. You take notes and you answer. Uh, Also, there's five questions I present here, and you answer them in great depth. Okay, so that's very important. You're supposed to, answer each questions as fully as possible with plenty of details and examples. I present, of course, all of that in the video series again in the recorded lectures again. No outside sources is very important. Refrain yourself from actually using other sources to answer those questions. And as long as you're using the material I present, you're going to be fine. But make sure your answers are well elaborated, they're extensive, and that show that you view the material, that you're not just, writing short answers that has no elaboration, no analysis whatsoever. Okay, very important. So this is very, very, very important. Again, that even though there are three topics uh, uh, for this second part of the semester that deals with the crisis of modernity, that you're not required to watch the 9 videos that I posted for those three topics. Okay, so for part one, you just choose one topic, either topic number 4 or topic number 5, and answer the questions as thoroughly as possible. Just to give you an example, again, if you choose topic number 4, just an example, for example, I'm just going to, choose, um, uh, for example, one question here. It says, explain, for example, first, explain the rise of the agrarian movement by paying attention to the difficulties of farmers during the latter part of the 19th century and some of the strategies they implemented to address these problems. So again, there were reform movements in the United States in the late 19th century, early 20th centuries, led by many groups. One reform movement was led by farmers, other by industrial workers, other by the middle class. So the first question is asking you to explain the rise of the agrarian movement. The agrarian movement was led by farmers, American farmers. And so I explained all of the difficulties that the American farmer, again, was dealing with in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that led them to organize and create this agrarian movement, the farmers movement in the United States. Things like, for example, um, the uh, expensive, for example, machinery they needed to buy. They needed to buy tractors, they needed to buy equipment, barbed wire, irrigation systems, fertilizers, in order to really modernize their farm, in order to produce a lot of crops for the market and make money. For example, I talk about that, in those lectures. Um, and so that was a common problem in many cases. In order to actually buy that equipment, they needed to actually, borrow money from banks, financial institutions. And in order to buy that equipment and get the loan, they needed to actually like pawn, in other words, their farm. They put their farm, their property, their entire farm as security for the loan in order to, secure, to guarantee, in other words, the loan. And in many cases, many farmers fell behind on the balance of payments and they lost their farms, for example. So 50% of American farmers ended up losing their farms, to banks in the late 19th century. That was a common problem. That was not the only problem. Other problems was that, you know, um, the transportation costs. They needed to pay a lot of money to transport their crops, to the city, and railroads. So there's a lot of money. Railroad rates were very elevated. Back then there was another problem. I talk about the middleman. There was also a middleman that dictated prices. An individual, a businessman coming from the city to buy all the produce from a farmer at very low prices because the middleman was turning around and sending, the crop at higher prices and so on. I talk about that as well. You know, um, I talk about, also natural catastrophes. Like droughts. Farmers were afflicted by droughts, by plagues, um, by blizzards, and so on. That destroy their crops and so on. So when you're talking about, for example, the agrarian movement, I need to see that you provide details about all of those problems that farmers were facing, and explain each one of them. I'm just giving you pretty much a survey here of those problems, and that you explain very well, very, very well elaborate answers, as to what actually happened to the American farmer and how those problems led the farmers to organize and start forming, associations and organizations like the Grunge, the National Farmers Alliance, and so on. I talk about their strategies about how to control prices, withhold grain, and so on, help each other pretty much stay in business and the like. I explain all of that again. So that's just an example of how the first question needs to be addressed. And of course, you go into the second question, it talks about industrial workers. I talk about the problem of industrial workers, what workers were facing, and so on. I talk about the third question about how farmers and workers are going to create a third party called the People's Party, in the United States, and what kind of reforms the People's Party wanted to bring about. The fourth question, I talk about the middle class and the progressive movement, and you also need to provide, a lot of details about what the middle class was going through, you know, during this time as well. What kind of problems they faced, and why is it that the middle class leaders of the middle class are going to launch this middle class movement called the progressive movement, and talk about their accomplishments as well. Okay. Now, if you decide you don't want to do that topic, you want to do instead the topic on World War One, that's fine. So just watch all of the videos again on World War One and answer the questions presented very thoroughly. For example, I mean, this is just an example. So if you are addressing World War One, the first question asks about the multiple causes. Provide an in-depth analysis of the multiple causes of World War One. Again, and I also provide about 4 to 5 major root causes. Okay, I talk about ethnic nationalism, how Europeans were divided along ethnic lines prior to World War One, and every ethnic group in Europe uh, created a nation for themselves. There were ethnic nations, that is to say, ethnic nations, and every ethnic nation, whether we're talking about the French nation or the German nation, for example, the Italian nation. I talk about different nations again that were considered to be, of course, nations composed of people that belong to the same ethnic group. That is to say, how people form ideas about themselves that they believe that they were superior to other ethnic groups. Okay, in other words, that there was a lot of ethnic pride in the nations of Europe, in that every nation believed that they were superior, more intelligent, more able, more advanced intellectually, scientifically, and so on. And that created a sense of separation and competition between themselves. So really, World War One was really uh, a war of ethnic groups. It was ethnic warfare, if you will. That what really motivated Europeans to go to war was to prove that their ethnic group was actually superior and therefore dominant, in Europe. That is to say, I also talk about colonialism, how the nations of Europe that went to war in World War One were, for the most part, European empires that colonized different parts of the world in order to extract valuable resources for their industries. They were extracting things like iron ore and coal, for example, rubber, zinc, lumber, and other products that were essential for their industries. Uh, I talk about the colonization of Africa by Europeans. Pretty much Europe went into Africa in 1884 and colonized the entire continent, most of it. And they carved, if you will, the continent of Africa amongst themselves and divided pretty much the continent among different colonies. What that did is that that created rivalries again among the Europeans over who was to get what in Africa, in other words. And of course, that created, competition, you know, as to who was going to get most out of Africa, and that pit certain empires against each other to prove who was going to actually be dominant in Africa, but also over China. They wanted to also sell their manufactured goods in China, and they also were competing over control of Chinese trade as well. I talk about all of that, of course. So this is again what I need to see when you're talking about the causes of World War One. The colonial competition, the ethnic nationalism. I talk about that as well. Um, and I talk about the system of alliances as well, the alliance system in Europe, the empires forming alliances and so on. That actually made it impossible for those alliances to actually go to war. I talk about all of that, and so this is what I need to see again. So when you're discussing the origins, it's not just that I'm expecting a couple of phrases or just a small paragraph and then you move on. I really need to see in depth again what those causes, the origins of World War One were, in other words, that I present, and so on. Again, so if you do this again, just try to answer each question as thoroughly as possible. Now, there's going to be also a part two. A part two of the second exam is going to be the key term section, and the key term section is going to be based exclusively on topic number 6. So if there's one topic that no one can do without, is topic number 6 on the Great Depression. Everybody must do topic number 6. It is only topic number 4 and 5 that are optional. Okay, those are optional because you choose, in other words, which one you want to do. But the Great Depression, everybody has to review the 3 sessions of the Great Depression because um, for part 2, which is 30% of the grade, you must answer 3 key terms as fully as possible. Okay, and those are actually extracted from the discussion on the Great Depression. There are 5. You choose 3 and you answer them as fully as possible. Again, um, those are the 5 key terms. You don't do all of them, just choose 3, the ones you feel most confident, and so on. But I also expect that you provide plenty of uh, explanation and elaboration on each one of them. So avoid trying to just answer, you know, each key term with a small paragraph and just move on because, again, uh, each key term is worth 10 points, 10 points for each key term. So the more you write, the more points you earn. Um, so, just to give you an example, uh, when I talk about the new industries of American consumer culture, I'm very, very thorough about, for example, what new industries emerged in the early 20th century that provided new consumer products. What Americans were buying, they were going crazy buying and shopping during the 1900s, 1910s, and 1920s. There was like a consumption spell, if you will, because there were new consumer goods that were not present in the United States before. There were things like automobiles, for example. People were spending on uh, automobiles. Of course, there was an automobile industry. This is something that Americans were buying by the millions, by the way. Millions of automobiles were purchased during the first decades of the 20th century. And with the automobiles, of course, came other things like traveling, vacationing, like the tourism industry was born as well. People taking tours to Florida, to California, Texas, many spots in the country became, you know, tourist attractions and destinations. People were spending on that, on traveling, vacationing, tourism as well. Um, also, um, so they were spending again on traveling as well. So there were also again other kinds of industries that offer consumer products like appliance industries, appliances, household appliances like industries that manufacture things like refrigerators, toasters, radios, irons, vacuums, for example. Um, During this time, household appliances, washing machines, for example, very, very, very common. I talk about all of that. I also talk about, in topic number 1, The entertainment industry. The entertainment industry also was born during this time, offering people outlets for entertainment, entertainment venues. Like, for example, there were uh, movies and films, for example, movie theaters, people going to the movies, for example, um, dances, or there were jazz bands and so on, and there were, of course, venues in which people will go and actually dance. There was jazz, for example, very very dominant music during this age called the Jazz Age. Okay, there were also things like sports venues as well. Sports all over the country are going to become very very popular. Baseball, football, auto racing, boxing, and so on. You know, so I talk about all of those new industries of American consumer culture, and I expect that you break it down and you explain each one of them, not just list those industries, but try to provide some elaboration as well. Okay, so once again, to sum it up again, this is a similar exercise. You work on this assignment as you go day by day, have it ready by June the 21st. So, you're only required for sure, to watch, everybody's required to watch the Great Depression, because the three key terms of part two come from the Great Depression. But for part one, once again, you're only required to choose one topic, either the fourth or the fifth, and answer all of the questions on that topic. Of course, you write it, you type it on your computer using Word, and regular font, Times New Roman, number 12, double space. You page number every page of the work with a cover page with all your information, and avoid at all costs using outside sources. Again, this is critical. Okay, if you want to pass this class, again, just concern yourself with the lecture material and nothing else. So refrain from using any outside material, no internet or outside sources like encyclopedias or articles and so on. You don't need that, again. And at the end, again, just save all your work, part one and part two, separated by heading. Of course, just indicate where's part one and part two. Um, and the key terms, if you can just provide also an identification of the key term, just write it, for example, so on, and save everything in a single file, whether it's Word or PDF, everything saved in a single file and upload it on Blackboard by Monday, June the 21st, 2021. Okay, so almost identical. It's not 100% identical, just because now part two of this exam has three key terms instead of two. Okay, and there's no bonus section per se. Here we're not going to have, again, a bonus section the way we did it in the first exam. So again, this is again the best possible review session and orientation I have for you. Um, if you have any questions, please let me know. Send me an email and I'll respond, immediately. Okay. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next review session. Thank you.